Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie noob nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink I have in sample form, and it's from K.W.Z of Poland. Brown Pink, which, I mean, if I were to call this color something, it would be Puce, which has always reminded me of puke. Which this kinda is-ish. I don't know, like, the thing is, like, I don't like pink already, and then to make it sort of like a mushy brownish color, bleh. Some people really dig it. Personally, it's just weird. Two colors I would not think to mix, brown and pink. And yet here we go. So, yeah, K.W.Z Brown Pink. So, here are the two pens I used. This is a Pilot Metropolitan with a Japanese fine nib, which is such a fine nib that I feel like I'm trying to write with a razor blade. It is so darn fine. So, yeah, I'm still learning how to use this without scratching through the paper. I write with a good bit of pressure, so something that thin, anyways. And this is a JinHao X450. And I love my X450s because they all tend to be pretty broad and pretty wet, and this one is. And you can probably tell just by how much you can see through the tines. So, yeah. I do love these things. Now, let's check out some comparisons. Because even though Puce is not a super common color, there are some things that are vaguely like this that I had. I compared it in one of the writing bits to Noodler's Nightshade, which a lot of sellers of this actually listed under purple, but mine was largely brown. And the thing is, it goes down looking mildly purple, almost maybe maroonish, but then it dyed really, really brown. So it's like this, but with a little more something, and it's darker, so that's Nightshade. Diatramentus Black-Brown, which actually had sort of a brown with a bit of a purple in it, which is it's sort of more purple than Nightshade. Nightshade is more brown. This one, again, is a little darker. Germain's Terre du Feu, or Land of Fire, which is a great name for an ink that I really was anything but interested in. This I thought was kind of Puce until I saw this, and this is Puce. It has a little more orange in it to the pink. It's sort of like a salmon-y brown, which sounds awful. It sounds like salmon that went bad. And then I also included K.W.Z's Iron Gall Red, which is actually pretty close, if darker. There's not a lot of red in this red, but yeah. And then Roaring Clinger's Sepia Brown, which actually, now that I'm looking at it, I don't know why I included it, so that's awkward. Moving on. Yeah, let's check out the chromatography, because the chromatography is interesting. This is the normal chromatography where you put the ink and instantly dunk it in the water. You can definitely see where that drop was initially put. It's a pretty solid gray, and then we go into this tan, and then we go into sort of a pink, and then we get more tan in a dark band up at the top. Now here's where I let it dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it, but there's not a lot of change. The band at the bottom is a little bit darker, the tan going up is a little lighter, the pink it's a smaller band, but it's brighter, and the tan bit up at the top is a little lighter. So, not a ton of change, but yeah. Now I wanted to see what this ink could sort of hold up against, and it was interesting. So the water really washed away that pink and left behind that sort of tan. But it washed out of the pen, both pens, pretty easily, so not too worried about that. 1/3 bleach solution got rid of the pink and turned the tan just sort of into a lighter tan. Ammonia pen flush really got rid of the pink, but the brown didn't move too much. Hydrogen peroxide had a similar kind of effect that the 1/3 bleach did, if not so strong a reaction. Alright, paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine, 90 grams per square meter. Now, admittedly, this test has changed over time. It has gotten darker and more brown. Initially, it was much closer to, where is it? It was kind of closer to Terre de Faux, if a little less orange. So, yeah, it's gotten darker over time, and I think I completed this. This might have been the second ink that I tested, so it's been a while. At least a month, maybe 2. So, yeah, over time it gets darker. I'm actually curious as to what it'll look like after 6 months. But anyways, we do get shading. As you can see, there are some dark bits and some light bits. Yeah, that Japanese fine took 16 seconds to dry. The Broad and Wet JinHao took 25. I'd say it's a 6 out of 10 wetness, so it is a little bit wet, but not out of control wet. Now, I'm just going to show you the broad just because it's easier to get on camera. We really do have shading here, but it's still puce, so yay? Question mark? But yeah, very well behaved. No bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. And like the chromatography kind of revealed, there's a good bit of water resistance. I mean, look at how thin that line is in the Japanese fine. And the dot. You can see that. The purple is gone. You get more of a sepia tan thing. But very clear, very there. If you had to recover that, you absolutely could. Next up is Fabriano, 85 grams per square meter. Yeah, we get shading, but it's still puce, so... Sorry, puce. Anyways, yeah, that Japanese fine took 13 seconds. The Broad and Wet JinHao took 26, and I hope I'll be able to get this on camera. Okay, that's not sheen, it's just shiny. It's gone really glossy. So I don't know what's going on there, but that happened. And again, just because this Japanese fine is so fine, I'm mostly going to stick to the broad just to show you the shading, because there is a distinct good bit of shading. I mean, it's quite noticeable. And what's funny is in these smears, that's where you can really see most of the pink. But yeah, so there's that. And again, water test, it's very clear, very there. I mean, that Japanese fine, you can absolutely read that. Didn't feather, didn't explode. You lost the pink, but you got this sort of sepia color. No bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. All good there. Next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter, where again we got some of the shininess where I laid it on really thick. And again, we get some shading. Now, the Japanese fine, again, took 13 seconds to dry. The Broad and Wet JinHao took 21. And again, I'm just mostly going to focus on the broad just because that's where it's most easy to see the shading. And there is a lot of shading. And actually, the color that's coming up on camera is exactly like what I'm seeing in person. It is this, like, it's like meat, like if you've ever seen, like, a steak left in the sun, like a raw steak, like the meat turns from pink to brown. I know that's, like, the worst analogy ever, but that's really the only thing that's coming to mind for this. Yeah, again, no bleed, no feather, no spread. I don't think there's any echo. I really don't think. But, I mean, that could be the quadrilateral paper kind of masking that a little bit, but I don't think so. I really don't think so. But yeah, water test, again, very clear, very there. You can see every single tiny little dot from the Japanese fine. You can see the writing very clearly. It's just not puce anymore. It's more of a sepia. So, yeah. Next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times and echo, just because it's so darn thin. And since this ink can get fairly dark, we might have some echo. Now, in the scrubby, I did lay it on pretty thick to try and make sure I could at least get some sheen on camera, or shininess, because it's not quite sheen, you know? It's just glossy. But anyways, really not going to be a problem with that Japanese fine. Maybe with the X450? Maybe? But yeah, here we get a lot of shine. But, you know, I wanted to make sure I could get it on camera. Now, this paper does draw out dry time. So that Japanese medium still took 18 seconds. And even though that is a super fine, I mean, super fine nib, the thing is, this ink is actually pretty saturated. And it was flowing kind of wet, so, well, I mean, I'd always like dry times to be faster, but, you know, it still kind of follows logic. Once you kind of try out the ink a little bit, it starts to make a kind of sense. Now, yeah, we get a good bit of shading. but it's still Puce. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's Puce. But yeah, still, I mean, you know, no bleed, no feather, no spread, all good in that regard. I mean, Tomoe River doesn't do that. But anyways, water test, this paper loves to let ink slide away. So I was thinking this was going to be where we had the littlest left. Really not so. I mean, look at that Japanese fine, which is so fine. That's very clear, very there. And the dots, the thing is, because this paper loves to let ink slide away, when I was mopping up, you know, the water after the test, it didn't dye the page. And look, even here in the water test, you still get shading. You get the same shading that you see in the writing, which is kind of fun. Now, for the next 3 tests, I just used the Japanese fine except to write the name. So here is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. Now here I say, they're minor spread, but let's do some comparisons. So here it is on non or less absorbent paper. Here it is on absorbent paper. I'd say that's like a Western medium. And considering this is like a Western extra fine, or like a needlepoint, that's saying something. We lose a lot of the shading, and actually here it's gone largely brown. I think because we lose that shading. Because if you've sort of been paying attention in the other tests, it's where the ink is thinnest that we get that pink. Where it gets laid on heavy, it's much more brown. So now that there is no shading to sort of differentiate between the two colors, we get a brown, but when you bring it in close, you almost see hints of pink underneath. But yeah, I mean, we mostly just get brown. It's a Pucey kind of brown, but it's definitely brown. Took 3 seconds to dry. You do get a very distinct woolliness. I mean, we get feathering, but it's not a ton. You know, like it's a little bit. And this line is so fine anyway, it's almost hard to see. You know, and considering this usually loves to like freak out because it's the world's worst 20-pound paper. Now, we do get some little dots. Granted, that is the scrubby. But we don't get a lot. You know, like they aren't everywhere. There's just a couple. So that's really not too bad. However, I think that is, you know, because this is a Japanese fine. It's so darn thin. So just something to be aware of. Now, this is absorbent paper, which absorbent papers tend to draw the ink in, make it harder to wash out. And it definitely did here. However, it's still mostly that sort of sepia color. Like even when you look at the two, you can see that this bottom bit has less pink. But it didn't freak out. It didn't feather, didn't explode, didn't spread into like a whole nother width. Very contained. Could be a lot worse. If you had to recover that, you absolutely could. Now, here's Mead Notebook Paper. And this paper, when I was doing this, it was starting to freak out and feather, which it hadn't always been doing. So, like, let's look at the word weird. I mean, it's hard to see just because this line is so thin. Or look at the S and the this above. We see some feathering. But that's something that this paper has been doing lately, so I don't know if it's entirely the effect of the paper or if it's, you know, them reacting with each other, but it was feathering. Now, here, again, when we compare the line width to the 20-pound, that's another way that I know that this is not minor spread. That is significant spread. Here, we do get some spread. When we compare it with the Tomoe River, we see that it did get a little broader, but really not much. This is like a Western extra fine now, so, you know, it's still very fine line, but we do lose shading. I'd say we lose like 98% of the shading. You really have to come in close to be able to see even like the littlest bits of light area. 3.5 seconds to dry. There is no bleed. And honestly, the closest we get is right there. But that's at the very start of the scrubby, and as I said earlier, I put a lot of pressure down when I write, so with such a fine nib on very cheap paper, I think I started to just like scratch through the paper. But everywhere else, nothing. If you had to write on this paper and you'd like to write on both sides, Japanese extra fine with this ink would be very good. However, I'd also like to point out that the name I wrote with the X450, that didn't bleed either. You can kind of see it, but I mean, that makes sense. It's a broader line. Now, this water test, this paper does like to freak out when you add water. However, here, it really didn't. You lose some of the pink. You get more of a tan sepia, but it didn't explode, didn't feather, didn't blow up, didn't really even dye the page that much. If you had to recover that, you could. Now lastly is Moleskine paper, which I hate because it hates ink. As demonstrated thusly. Holy mother of God, we haven't even seen this stuff. I mean, first of all, look at this texture. Yes, you can see once again the separation of pink and brown if you get in real close. But if you get in real close, you also get this. Look at this gross texture and all this feathering. I mean, ugh. It's nasty, and it took 5 seconds to dry. I got very upset because I hate this paper. And we actually get a few spots where it wants to come through. Again, we get kind of the dotting, like we saw with the 20 pound. So, but here's the surprising thing. Look at this water test. Here, it got lighter, which is not really something we've seen. I mean, like, even the premium papers stayed pretty dark. Here, it got lighter, and not even, like, consistently. You see how, like, this half of the W is light, but that part isn't? I don't know. And then it, like, doubled down on woolliness. Yeah, I hate Moleskine. Anyways, so, there you go, for your consideration. K.W.Z Brown Pink. It is really, really puce. Which means it's brown pink. So, I mean, you're getting exactly what's on the tin. You know, it's, but what was interesting was that it has changed colors in, you know, the month or so that this has been sitting in my finished test box. I'm kind of curious as to what it's going to look like in 6 months. So, yeah, it's puce. In a Japanese find, it actually did pretty alright-ish on Mead. There was some spread on the 20 pound. There was a lot more water resistance than I was expecting going into this. So that's cool. If you have to, you know, if that's something you got to worry about. And also it changes colors. It goes from puce to sort of like a sepia, so that's neat. Anyways, for your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. Bye.